or whatever kind of order I can get it in. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll start the meeting with approval of the agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carried. Motion to approve the May 16th Community Development Committee minutes.
Move approval.
Second.
And we have a motion and a second to approve the May 16th minutes. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. We have 7 items under the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move approval. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Great, so far, motion carried. We're now on to the non-consent business, and our first item is number 2022-140, JT, City of Vermillion 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. Review file 22180-1, Patrick Boylan.
Thank you, Councilmember. Okay, very excited to be here. Hopefully I remember how to work everything here, so bear with me. Before you today, as the acting chair said, Chair Vento said, is the comprehensive plan for the City of Vermillion. Just a few left to do for the 2040 process. It's a very small community in Dakota County. It's completely surrounded by Vermillion Township. Regional system map here of note, this is a county road that runs roughly east-west and then scoots off to the southwest. The green there is not a regional park, that is it's a park preserve. But of note is the Vermillion River Greenway Trail, which runs from the southwest to the northeast. The spray can symbol, as you might recall, is a search area. It's not a real, it's not a set trail with a master plan as of yet. So from a community designation perspective, again, the smaller in the middle with the yellow is a rural center, so completely surrounded by the township. If you've been out to that part of Dakota County, a lot of soybean, a lot of corns, a lot of alfalfa, lots of crops. City of Vermillion, again, an old or existing center for agriculture activities, and one of the photos in my slides here shows a grain elevator, but again, in a small nucleus area for residential, some commercial. Forecasts show a very, very modest growth between now and 2040 of 10 households, 10 in population and 10 households, and then employment actually increasing, proximity of the highway mostly related to that. The residential density, as you can see, achieves the policy objectives of Thrive for a rural center community. Overall expected density between 3.79 and 7.17. Again, that's for expected change. Household growth of 10 is very, very modest. To date, as far as I know, they have not had any building permits to date, and we are, passing the halfway point of 2022, so we'll see how that goes. Existing plan lands, the white areas in this map are the ag portion of Highway 42 run through the middle. The blue institutional and the red and the orange is the apartment building. The red being commercial along the Dakota County Highway there, which is Highway 62. Plan land use, again, between the two, not a lot of changes. Again, some existing residential in the north and east component of the community, but again, a very similar pattern, just sort of on the edges of this for continued residential growth and or some intensified commercial development possibly. This actually grain elevator is actually from, actually in the city. So the plan before you today conforms to regional system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. Again, the adjacent being just Vermillion Township, and then of course Dakota County as well. It's kind of a lot. I'll read through it just so it's on the record. The council, before the proposal for you today and then to the council, is that the City of Vermillion, we authorize them to place its 2040 plan into effect. And the city needs to provide the council the date the watershed approves the final local water management plan and the date the city adopts the final local water management plan. Request the city also provide the council with a copy of the final adopted local water management plan to be included in the final plan. So as we go through these and we adopt, the cities then in turn adopt the plan, we want them to clean up the final document and get that to us, and this is a placeholder reminder. And so to say that if it differs from the final version plan, that they need to give us the final plan for that. Advise the city to implement the advisory comments and review record for forecasts and water supply. Next week, the Environment Committee will hear this. Kyle Colvin will present, and then the final council will take action later this month as well. This is actually St. Peter's Church. It is probably the oldest structure out there. If you've ever been out to Vermillion, it's hard to miss. One of the few communities that Councilmember Wolf and I have not been out to have dinner or something like that. So I'm available for any questions you have at this time.
Questions or comments? Anyone? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you,
I was gonna
Madam Chair.
call you Councilmember Molly, but
That's me. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question, and it may actually be more appropriate for Lisa, I don't know. But anyway, so I'm just wondering what the difference is now in the census counts between the census and the council population. Which one is closer, or what are we doing with how are we factoring in the differences?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cummings, our census numbers that we have in here are from 2020, and we do have in the past tried to only adjust our forecasts when communities are seeking those adjustments or when we find them to be like grossly different. It's going to have a really large impact on their planning capacity. For a community like the city of Vermillion, where you see their population census 2020 is 441, which is higher than what we projected. Their land use plans actually don't need to change all that much to support the growth that they've apparently already accommodated in their population, because you'll see that their households are actually right about where we expect them to be there too. So pretty modest. But whenever we see anything that's going to be significantly different, that's where we want to work with the community to say, well, where should we be, and work through that before we come to you for adoption. And that's where you've seen revisions in the past, adjustments in our forecast that we've worked through with the local government to right size that so that they can plan appropriately for where they want to be.
Thank you. Yeah, I know it isn't a huge difference with Vermillion, but I'm thinking as we move forward and we have this discrepancy, how we're going to factor that in. So thank you for that. Thank you for this.
You're welcome.
anyone else? Do we have a motion to approve?
Move approval.
We have a motion
Second?
and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, we have the City of Vermillion plan approved. Thank you, Patrick. Next, we have 2022-156 JT City of Bethel 2040 Comprehensive Plan Update, review file number 22307-1 with Eric Wojchik.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. I'm going to sit down, even though I am younger than Patrick Boylan. It's been a long day.
He's shaking his head.
It's nice to see you all again in person. It's been a long time. I think this is my first in-person meeting with you all. My name is Eric Wojchik. I'm a planning analyst in the local planning assistance community development, local planning assistance work unit within the community development division. Before you today is a review of the City of Bethel's 2040 Comprehensive Plan, another rural center community. We don't have that many of these communities, and I think they're really interesting communities, kind of like Patrick was highlighting, a lot of historical character in these communities. I'd like to let the community know that Nate Sparks of Northwest Associated Consultants and Gingerberg, the city clerk for the City of Bethel, worked in drafting this plan. Hopefully this works. Oh, great. As shown in Figure 1 in your staff report, this map shows the location of regional components within the City of Bethel, of which there are none. There are no regional park system components in the city. However, the plan does acknowledge the state recreation lands within the city in that northwest corner, which is the Bethel Wildlife Management Area administered by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. You might wonder about wastewater in Bethel. They actually have their own small wastewater plant that they run themselves, so they don't use the regional system. So used to saying next slide, please, that it's quite weird to get used to. As shown in Figure 2 of the staff report, the city is identified as a rural center community, designation, and is consistent with Thrive MSP 2040. Bethel is located in the northern part of Anoka County. It's surrounded by St. Francis to the west and East Bethel to the east. In terms of forecasted growth, you can find this in Table 2 of the staff report. It shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts the city will grow by 70 people, representing 40 households. There will be an increase of 50 jobs in the city in that same time frame, and I believe they've actually exceeded their employment forecasts already. So the land use table within the staff report shows the planned residential density in the rural center areas of the city. The overall density for guided residential land is expected to be between 3.7 and 5.5 units per acre. Communities with a rural center designation under Thrive are expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth at overall average minimum densities of 3 to 5 units per acre for new development and redevelopment. Bethel's plan is consistent with this policy. As shown in Figure 3 of your staff report, the map reflects the existing land use of the city of Bethel. The existing land uses within the city are predominantly residential at 70%. Most of the existing commercial and office space, which is about 1%, and industrial areas at 3% are located along Main Street and University Avenue. And approximately 19% of the city is parks and open space. The plan introduces a new land use for the 2040 plan. This is a downtown mixed-use land use category with an 8 to 12 residential units per acre density range and 50% residential expectation. The plan also introduces goals and related policies to preserve and enhance the historical character of that downtown area. The plan includes the commitment to evaluate potential downtown design guidelines to ensure that design reflects historical character of the downtown. Staff find that the plan conforms to regional system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with adjacent and affected jurisdictions. Proposed action of the Met Council is on this slide, which is that the Met Council authorize the City of Bethel to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, require the city to provide to the council the date the city adopted the final local water management plan, and send a copy of the final local water management plan if it differs from the draft version dated September 2019. And then finally, advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecasts, housing, and water supply. And here you see the schedule for this comprehensive plan update moving through committees. We have the Environment Committee on Tuesday, June 14th, and this will be reviewed at the Metropolitan Council meeting on Wednesday, June 22nd. And again, I'd just like to thank the city for their hard work on this plan, and also the consultant that assisted with the city, Mr. Nate Sparks. Thanks. Any questions?
Any questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second.
Second?
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you, Chair
Eric.
Vento.
Eric and Patrick, I'd have to tell you, I agree. I really like the presentation of these smaller communities. It's pretty cool. And having been through both, it's fun to learn more. I kind of feel like the last couple of years, we've been on a little regional tour here with all these comp plans. It's great. Next on the agenda, 2022-157, funding recommendations for the 2022 Round 1 Livable Communities Demonstration Account and Transit-Oriented Development Pre-Development Grants. Stephen, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Stephen Klimek, a Senior Planner in Community Development, here to present the funding recommendations for the, potentially slight correction on that, the 2022 Round 1 Livable Communities Act Pre-Development Grants. We'll connect on that. I recognize the cities and project teams from a number of our recommended grants are in the audience today. I want to thank them for both their applications and for being here today. The Livable Communities Act has several goals that are shared across a number of our programs. These are to create more housing choice across the region, create more living wage jobs, support environmental sustainability through reducing greenhouse gas emissions and conserving natural resources, and then to improve regional connections. And finally, an overarching goal of all of the programs is to realize more equitable development outcomes across the region. Our LCA pre-development program grants are for applicants who are in early stages of a development project or redevelopment project that has the potential to advance LCA and Thrive 2040 goals. Pre-development grants are intended for projects that need to complete additional work to fully shape the detail and final development. And pre-development grants typically include a range of uses including but not limited to feasibility analysis, various project studies, infrastructure engineering, development and planning needs, design work, and community engagement. As part of the fund distribution plan adopted in March 2022, Council approved up to $2 million for the LCA pre-development grants to be awarded in 2 application rounds with $1 million available in each funding opportunity. And to my note, historically, pre-development applications and awards have been offered separately through the Livable Communities Demonstration Account, LCDA, and transit-oriented development programs. These 2 funding opportunities were combined into a single pre-development opportunity this year to simplify the process for both applicants and for staff. And that administrative change is outlined in the fund distribution plan. On April 18th, 7 pre-development applications were received from 3 cities for the Round 1 funding opportunity. Applications were reviewed by a team of council staff. These applications were scored on 3 evaluation categories: project outcomes and how they meet both LCA and Thrive goals, project process, and project team. And applicants must score a minimum of 22 out of the 32 points available to be eligible for funding. And with that, the scoring process has yielded a staff recommendation for the 2022 Round 1 funding opportunity that the Metropolitan Council award 4 Livable Communities Act pre-development grants totaling $475,000. Given that recommendation, this table is a summary of all 7 applications organized by their scoring rank. The 4 projects recommended for funding are from the City of Brooklyn Center, the City of Minneapolis, and the City of St. Paul. These 4 applications all received scores above the minimum point threshold of 22 points to be eligible for funding, and are recommended based on their scoring rank. The funding recommendation takes into account a $300,000 award limit per city. Therefore, 2 City of Minneapolis projects are not recommended for funding because the city's award limit was reached with 2 other recommended projects. And additionally, 1 project submitted by the City of St. Paul is not recommended for funding because it did not meet the minimum score to be eligible. There's $1 million available for the Round 1 opportunity, and after the recommended award amount of $475,000, $525,000 remains. This remaining funding will be allocated to the Round 2 funding opportunity later this year, and any remaining funding from that will be allocated to the LCDA and TOD development programs later this year. And with that, I'm going to review each recommended project. The City of Brooklyn Center application is for the International Food Village project, requested and recommended award of $100,000. The project is a proposed multi-phase redevelopment of a 9-acre site. It'll be anchored by an approximately 110,000 square foot ethnic supermarket and is expected to create 100 to 120 living wage job opportunities, and will also include an African brewery and a bulk purchasing establishment. The concept plan also includes approximately 175 units of affordable housing. 20% of the units will be affordable to households at or below 60% of area median income. And then grant uses include financial feasibility analysis, stormwater management planning, and site planning and architectural design. The first City of Minneapolis application recommended is for the Gemma River project. The requested and recommended award is $150,000. This project is the reconstruction of a damaged property on the Lake Street corridor. It will replace 7 ground floor commercial and retail spaces for local entrepreneurs and add an additional density with at least 6 units of affordable housing. The project provides an opportunity for displaced businesses to return to the area and intensify the site with additional housing. The grant uses include developer mentoring, site planning and public realm plans, and a financial feasibility analysis. The second City of Minneapolis application is for the RE4RM project. The requested and recommended award is $150,000. This project is a proposed master plan redevelopment of the damaged U.S. Bank site on Lake Street. The project intends to result in BIPOC and community ownership of up to 4 separate vertical development projects and includes affordable and commercial mixed-use developments. Each development would be connected to an aquifer thermal energy storage district energy system and also linked by a connected public realm plan, including a healing garden. The grant uses include district energy engineering, community engagement, site planning, and stormwater management plans. And the City of St. Paul application is for the African American Community Development Center project. The requested and recommended award is $75,000. This project aims to create non-traditional pathways to home ownership for mid to large-sized families with incomes at or below 60% AMI. And the project intends to establish a model for sustainable co-op affordable multifamily housing. And the grant uses for this project include financial feasibility analysis, architectural and site design, community engagement, soil testing, site selection, developer mentoring, and wealth building strategies. So in conclusion, the funding recommendation before you today is that the Metropolitan Council award 4 Livable Communities Act pre-development grants totaling $475,000. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair. I am really glad to see that we had a number of applicants that applied for these livable community grants. It's good to see that the programs and application process has been simplified. Hopefully that is helping, and I'd like to see how, at the end of this year, how well our streamlined process is working and how well it's working to meet the livable community equity grants and minimum scoring. It's great to see that these grants are coming from very diverse communities, and I see these as great opportunities to recharge our economy and provide valuable services and health equity to, especially with regard to the Brooklyn Center International Food Business Development, as well as the Minneapolis, the Brooklyn Center International Food Business, and the Minneapolis local anti-displacement efforts for businesses. That's great. I do have a question, and that is for the International Food Village project. How do we have an idea of a pipeline for BIPOC businesses in the development, engineers, developers, architects?
Madam Chair, Councilmember, yes. Give me 1 second. I'm used to having like 3 screens that has all this up in front of me. There are a number of partners that they are working with. The African Career Education Resource Center and the Sierra Club are identified partners in the application. They'll be working with them and have identified a number of potential other businesses that will be coming in through both for the African brewery and the bulk purchasing facility is kind of mirrored to be a Costco-like establishment, but geared towards African foods.
Okay. Let's see, what was the other thing that I'm thinking?
And the project team is also here if they want to add any additional info.
Sure, if they would like to.
If there's anything else you would like to add,
Chair, is that okay?
jump
I
in.
don't know what, if there's anything I can add about the Brooklyn Park project is, I think what you didn't mention was the medical facility that we're going to have there. We're going to have about 150,000 feet of medical facility to treat especially the African immigrant that are coming. And we're also going to provide a lot of job services for non-traditional employment for those people. So I think we are very excited about it, and we have a lot of partners working also with us to have that. So I think it's.
Yes.
Yeah, I know that area, it's in my district, and I know that we definitely have a strong need, like I mentioned earlier, for health equity, and the fact that there's going to be a medical facility is great. The design of the building, it's an art piece.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's really going to recharge that area, so.
Yeah, we definitely want to make it a destination, really, not only for Minneapolis, but for people who coming from outside, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, to come and see the masterpiece of what we are going to do in that location. So we are very excited about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Could you give your name, sir?
My name is James Seninglar. I am the CEO of IFC, International Food Corporation.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Myself, I'm African, so I'm very delighted to see a really giant food surface here in the neighborhood. So
Okay.
thank you for your.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Well-
Thanks for your support. Yeah, any,
I have a question. Will this be both wholesale and retail? by
yeah,
chance?
both wholesale. We have the wholesale and then the retail.
Okay.
And also what we're trying to do is that whole center, we're trying to incorporate that into a mall. That's really what we're trying to do. So we want to buy the other piece of the property so we can incorporate the whole center.
Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Madam Chair. When would you hope to be open? I'm excited. I want to put it on my calendar.
Yeah, I think we are looking at 2023. We really want to have the groundbreaking on the center by the fall of this year. If everything goes well, we have the architect, we have everybody lined up now, ready to go. So we think we want to have groundbreaking by the fall of this year to start the whole process. And it should take a year, 2 years to have it open. Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
On the engineering side, are you planning to work with minority-owned firms or?
Yes, yes, yes. We have several minority engineering firm and architectural firm. Mohammed Lawar, who did the architect, is a Nigerian. So yeah, we have several minority and women too that are working with us in this.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious, so from you, perhaps you can give us some insight, because we kind of changed our criteria for applying. Did it simplify? And perhaps you're not familiar with the way we used to do it, but I'm wondering from both sides, from the applicant perspective as well as staff perspective, were we successful in our first attempt to try to simplify things?
Well, yeah, I think the guy who is responsible for the application is here, Mr. Odua. He's the one who was assigned to fill out the application, and he would tell you how difficult or how easy it was to go through it.
If you could begin by identifying yourself, sir, that would be great.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Odoa Gamoye, Brooklyn Park resident.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And do you want to ask your question again?
It was me.
Yes, you.
Thank you. How was the application process for you and working with our staff? Are there things as an applicant that you might suggest that we do differently?
Yeah, this was my first time. It was confusing initially. Then I had to go over it 2, 3, 4 times. But I had enough assistance from the City of Brooklyn Center and also from the London Group that helped me clean up. My terms were quite different from what they did. So, but again, since it was the first time, I didn't really know how difficult it was or how easy it was. But it was confusing. But at the end, we were able to get it done. Because I know, actually, I'm glad to meet you here. Mr. Clement returned the application two different times because he insisted on, he was asking us, tell us what the funds cannot be used for pre-development expenses, and then I'll go back to the London Group, and it's okay, do it that way. But at the end, we got it done, so, yeah.
So it worked.
Thank you.
Yeah, good job.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Good
Oh,
job.
I'm sorry. Oh, wait, Councilmember Cummings.
I
had
just
something.
want to follow up with a couple, from a staff perspective, and again, I know we're early on in trying this new process, but do you think that it was beneficial?
We're so far pretty happy with how we've streamlined for this year, both in the combination of both the LCDA and the TOD program. It kind of established a lot of confusion, which one should we go into, what's the difference? And the kind of cleaned up criteria, simplified criteria, made it a lot easier. I know Meg Beekman from the City of Brooklyn Center really appreciated the simplified process. She's familiar with how we've worked through things in the past. She's on our Livable Communities Advisory Committee for the Development Grant Program. And it's good to kind of have an opportunity to go back and forth with applicants to just make sure the application is set at meeting all of our criteria to the best of its ability, and it kind of sets the stage for all of you to approve.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. Odua, a Brooklyn Park resident who I'm familiar with, I am glad that it being your first time, you were able to work with Metropolitan Council staff as well as Brooklyn Center staff. The feedback that you've given us today is very helpful, and we'll continue to look at that in the housing work group that I chair. And also, you know, I've asked Ms. Barajas to give us some feedback as well, because that's very helpful. Obviously, you guys did something right because you ranked the top of all the applicants, so thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thanks. I just want to make one final comment, and that is just, these are really exciting, and I'm glad that they were awarded the money that they were awarded, and I thank you for being here, because I think it's really, really helpful to hear from applicants and from people involved in the process, not only from our staff is terrific, but it is really great to hear from all of you representing organizations that are applying and how you work with the Met Council. So it's very helpful to us. So thank you for taking the time to be here.
So is there, I'm thinking we're at the end of discussion. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
And second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you. We're now on to our information items. We have 3 this afternoon, and our first is the Regional Park System Historical Cultural Study Project Update by Jessica Lee and Amanda Lovely. Thanks. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair and council members. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Wait for the presentation. All right, there we go. So for the record, my name is Jessica Lee, and I'm a senior park planner, and I'm with Amanda Lovely. She's our parks ambassador. And we're going to discuss the historical cultural study and just give an update on what we've been up to and our next steps. So first I'm going to start with some background, because it's been a while since we've talked about this. I believe we talked about it with you about a year ago, but I think that's right. So just as a reminder, the goal of the historical cultural study is to develop a baseline history of the regional park system and develop tools to bring it alive with park agencies to tell a broader history of our system. And the purpose is to understand the region's history as it relates to how we arrived at today, and to daylight our regional park system's past and present day inequitable use. Our approach is in partnership with our agencies to bring on a consultant to help us tell a broader history of the regional park system using innovative tools and techniques. So in the last year or so, this is what we've done so far. We had a great parks intern last summer who assembled a report on the history and formation of the system. And we recorded a presentation on that report and shared it with our agency historical cultural study task force members. And this task force is made up of at least one staff person from each regional park implementing agency. We then met with each agency individually, one-on-one, to discuss the presentation and the information gathered to date. And then we also discussed what the agencies were hoping to get out of the study and their desired outcomes and next steps. Then, of course, we shared those meeting summaries with the agency task force and with our regional parks directors at a partner meeting. And using all that information, we developed our request for proposal for a consultant. And now I'll pass it to Amanda.
Good evening. I'll get closer. I'm not used to being loud. Good evening. I'm Amanda Lovely. I'm really going to have to use my eyes here. I feel like I am also old like Patrick. All right, so here on the screen is the timeline that, again, Jessica mentioned last summer. We had an amazing intern who helped us look at the founding of each of the regional parks and lay it out on a timeline, also correlating that to what was happening in history here in the Twin Cities region. So starting to look at, while the parks were being founded, what else was happening in the Twin Cities. So we use that kind of summary of the history to work with the agencies and to begin to figure out how are we going to move through this project. And so we created this mind map as a visual tool to think about how to move this project forward, what parts we were going to focus on at what parts of the project. And here is our mind map. Again, don't worry, you don't have to try to read these small letters either. We're going to bring up the next slide, which will have all of the words. But we use this kind of visual tool to break down the parts of the project. So hearing the priorities from the agencies and what tools they would use, and kind of breaking it down into the past, the present, and the future. So the past is to tell the history of the regional park system and the complex stories and exclusionary policies that have shaped the system. So we wanted to create this kind of baseline history on that, similar to that timeline, and maybe create these visual tools like a GIS story map or interactive GIS layers, videos, infographics to kind of show the history of the park system. We're also interested in more specific case studies focusing on specific parks or specific cultural histories of specific groups. Then moving into the present, we're hoping to work with a consultant to bring forward BIPOC stories, connecting people to the outdoors, and possibly creating walking tours, podcasts, videos, tools for the agencies to work with their boards around the history and engagement practices and improving, again, barriers to underserved groups. And then a public-facing information, thinking about how do we bring the history alive in our physical parks. So using tools like public art, programming, interpretive signage, and thinking about how would we address a land acknowledgement for the whole system. And then using everything we had learned up until that point to think about the future. So thinking about demographics and forecasting around climate change and the equity impacts on certain communities, and also thinking about the policy implications, our ordinances, our parks and trails planning, and community development.
All right, and so our next steps, we do have an RFP posted on our website right now for our consultant, and proposals are due tomorrow at noon. We're hoping to hire a consultant in the next several weeks, and then once we have them on board, we'll reconvene our agency task force and work with the consultant to develop a work plan. And with that, we'd love to hear your thoughts and questions, any ideas you have. Are we headed in the right direction? What are you excited about? And that's all, so thank you.
This is great. And rather than go through the formality of needing to be called on, just go ahead and speak up, council members, in terms of your responses to these questions. What are we excited about? If we found anything that might be missing, and are they headed in the right direction?
I'm excited to hear what you come up with. This is an interest of mine, and I've done a little bit of reading about it so far, not much, and I've got a lot to learn about it myself. I'm curious, when you think about exclusionary policies, like what are some, I think of a few things, either policies or just how the parks in general can have an unwelcoming feel, or the way that they're designed, or maybe are designed for the dominant culture. But when you think about exclusionary policies that we've had, what comes to mind for you? Or maybe I'll ask that to my fellow council members too.
Yeah,
You go ahead, jump on in, free for all.
okay. Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I really think that, you looking at the past, where are we today, and the planning for the future, I'm interested in like the programming aspect and, how the equity impacts, like you were talking about. If we focus on just the forecasting and the policy implications, there's one piece that's missing, which was one of the questions, and that is the handoff. Okay, who are we working with to inform, engage on the programming pieces that we will not be doing? And how do we close whatever gaps are missing, or close some of the disparate gaps that we've had historically. If we can add pieces like that to our plans and follow up in terms of how we're partnering with organizations that will actually be doing the implementation and programming, I think that would be great. To hear from them and to help us adjust our forecasting and planning and policy as we move through the processes.
Part of that handoff, we'll talk about that in the next agenda item with the equity grants.
Right, right.
Right, it's kind of like, it's like a feedback loop or continuous improvement loop. That part, I think, in almost any organization kind of gets missed. Yeah.
I think also hiring multicultural consultants who are coming from a diverse community will really provide a very important feedback. So I'll just, highlight that point.
Councilmember Wolf, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So is the goal of this to examine what things didn't work, or is it more global? Because everything that is brought up seems to be around what didn't work, but when you look at our system compared to other places, we have amazing public access to nature compared to other major metropolitan areas. And so, I don't want to get into a let's bash everything sort of thing. And is that what you guys are going for, is finding what didn't work, or is it more global of everything?
Yeah, thank you, council member. I would say it's more global. We're looking at, we want to consider the history and what we did to get us to where we are. But then we're looking at not just, is there access, but are people using the parks? And if not, why? Do people feel comfortable in the parks? And how can we make everyone feel like it's their park? And we realize this is a really big scope, and we struggled for a year to narrow it down into a RFP for a consultant, because there's so much we would love to do. And we also recognize that this might result in another phase. After this first phase, we might have more work to do. We don't expect to solve all of the problems in the next year.
Okay.
The other thing that came up at the MPHA meeting last week after this presentation, we had quite a conversation about it. And the one thing that occurred to me is tonight when I go home, I will go past a regional park, Battle Creek Regional Park, and then I will go past several community parks in Maplewood. And what may not be happening in Battle Creek Regional Park as far as programming may be happening in those community parks. So I think one of the other things that we need to keep in mind, and I don't know if at some point we need to be coordinating some with communities, is what do you have available that we don't need to worry about, so that we're not replicating things and trying to meet a need that's already being met. As far as I know, I've got to stop and think here, there are no basketball courts in Battle Creek Park. There's a water park, there are lots of trails, there's a dog park, there's cross-country skiing, there's
Mountain biking.
Mountain biking.
Really great playground.
A really cool playground, yep, and shelters. But near there's a basketball court. So and one of the questions that we look at is, which age groups aren't we meeting? Which age groups do we have gaps in? Well, if a regional park has a gap in a certain age category, it may be that they're just stopping at a different park. It may not be that they're missing that outdoor experience. The other thing that is right nearby to Battle Creek Park is Fish Creek, which is fabulous hiking area. So I don't want to make more work, but to some extent, at some point, it might be good for us to kind of have an inventory of what else exists. And are we putting our energies in the right direction?
Madam Chair, I would agree. Very few people actually understand what regional parks are. I mean, most people who go to a park, they don't care who owns it, unless they have to pay a fee, like you have to pay a fee to go to the state parks.
Right.
Otherwise, people don't care who runs the park. They just go to do what they want to do. And that may shift during your lifespan, too. I spent many, many summers on baseball fields with 3 boys playing baseball and didn't have time to do anything else for a while. But part of that history needs to be that these are like state parks. They're supposed to be about nature. And I'm actually pretty flabbergasted by the wonderful things that our regional park agencies have been doing to improve the outdoor experience for different ages. Like Whitetail Woods has a bunch of outdoor things for kids now. And some of the other parks have some, just piles of sticks, and kids make things with sticks in the woods, rather than a plastic play set, although I did go to Chutes and Ladders a week ago with my grandson. But I think it's important to, as part of this, to acknowledge the role of regional parks versus city parks for people that might not understand that, and give ourselves a little grace. I think we've been working really hard to make improvements, and it's a slow process because every improvement costs money, but there's been a lot of effort at trying to make it easier for all people to be at our parks. Just in the last 13 years that I've been here, I've seen a huge...
Well, and in the last 2.5 during COVID, regardless of who runs the parks have been a godsend for a lot of people. And particularly people in my age category. I have so many friends who regularly will give me credit for being on the Met Council, and they'll start giving me credit for a local park rather than a regional park. I try to politely correct them without sounding too bossy and like a former elementary teacher, but yeah.
Yeah, when I was thinking about the pandemic and the use of the regional parks during the pandemic too, and we saw something happening with a lot more diversity and a lot more people out on the trails during the pandemic. Are we nimble enough to respond and take advantage of something that's happening? For example, if we saw that, we're up 30%, how do we connect with those folks and say, thank you for coming to our park? Here's, a parking sticker or whatever, so that there's some incentive for them to continue, or maybe even work, just kind of thinking out of the box, some partnerships, whatever we can do to capture these folks that are coming through that normally don't come through. Now, me and my friends were, during the initial shutdown, we walked all year long, including all winter long, and purchased, the boots and the hats and the coats, and they even went and bought snowshoes so that they could continue throughout. And it was really fun. But now that things have opened up, people are kind of going back to what they normally do. And now we've missed that window.
Some of the parks, though, I think, did a good job of connecting and stay connected. And I know in previous presentations, like with Three Rivers, I've taken a look at their website. If I were a young mom living out in that corner of the region, I'd be looking at that website at least once a week, because there's so much great programming there. So I think it kind of goes back to the generations and the needs and the desires, And I would guess that there are some regional parks where there maybe isn't as much communication, just depending on where they're at in terms of the growth of their park.
Yeah, I'm not sure, what activities happened there's a lot of regional parks to capture and get feedback from folks that hadn't been there before. But it's a positive thing, that we want to acknowledge.
Yes.
And, Minnesota is just full of parks. We've got a lot of water bodies. It's a beautiful nature place to live in. I mean, you can see it when you're flying in from other states. And sometimes we take that for granted. But, so we're obviously headed in the right direction, but the discussion is, what are we excited about? We talked about that, and what can we do differently? So we'll continue to do that, I guess.
I'll just add, so I read one article about this, so I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, right? But what I did read was really interesting because it was about access, and Councilmember Wolf is 100% correct that we have amazing access. The article pointed out, or the article talked about a case study of a park in Texas. Happened to be formerly owned by a slave-owning family in the 1850s, turned into a park. So it's got that historical trauma associated with the park, number one. It's surrounded, I think it's near Dallas, surrounded by communities that are 50% or more BIPOC, but only, I think it was 11% BIPOC use the park. So they did an analysis like, okay, what's happening here? Why isn't the park being used? And I hope that this kind of gets to that point as well, because I think we have similar sorts of challenges. I think I remember a few years ago, Councilmember Atlas Engelbretson talking about Theodore Wirth Park, how that's similarly surrounded by BIPOC communities, but it doesn't see the same numbers in the park itself. So I think an analysis like this, of like, what's happening here? We're doing better. How can we double down on that and continue that upward trend?
Well, speaking of Theodore Wirth Park, I saw on Facebook many photos of our former council member, Atlas Engelbretson, on the slopes with the kids.
Oh, good.
Sliding and skiing, and so, you know, I think if we can continue that's great. And I think the pandemic probably helped for that program to be successful as well.
I think also a targeted outreach to underserved community, especially in East African community, Latino community will help. Because sometimes getting the information in a culturally appropriate manner makes a big difference. And also, do we have enough staff who are, you know, bilingual, bicultural, who can really go there in the community and build trust?
If I can hop in, can you remind us again kind of what the time frame is? I know that you're looking to hire a consultant in the next couple of weeks, and then how do you see this unfolding so that we can use this information in setting policy going forward?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. We're looking at having a consultant for about 1.5 years, up to 2 years, I think. And during that time, they'll be doing a lot of targeted outreach, working with the agencies, and hopefully at the end of that 18 months to 2 years period, we'll have some ideas for how to move forward. That's one of the things we're hoping to get from the consultant is practical ideas of what can we do now. So we're not just left with a report, but actual like steps that we can take to start implementing what we've heard.
Is it possible to give additional points to the consultants if they speak 2 or 3 languages?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. We are expecting that we'll need our consultants, or at least sub-consultants, to be bilingual or multilingual.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So much.
I'm just curious, how many consultants have the qualifications that you're looking for? Or, I mean, not specifically, but in general, is that a large pool? Is it a tiny pool? Or what do you expect?
Yeah, it's a great question. We had a pre-proposal meeting with interested parties, and there were about 11 people on the call, which we thought was a pretty good turnout. Those were all people that were interested. We don't know if they'll all put in a proposal, but we have hopes that we'll get several good proposals.
One more question. And is there any way or any support for consultants if they need help with the application? Because sometimes just filling the application is a challenge for many people when new to the game.
Yeah, our procurement, we were working with our procurement office and had a great team member, John. We should be able to remember his last name, but he was really helpful with reaching out to the consultants and asking if they needed help and what they needed. Yeah, we were surprised by how amazing of a partner
Shanti?
he was. I think, was that his last name?
Like,
Yes, okay.
We've lost our memory during COVID.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. I was just going to say, with that level of interest, that's terrific, but would it be possible to follow up if those individuals or those organizations do not follow through with the application? As the gentleman in the earlier presentation said, it can be challenging, it can be confusing, so to make sure that we are connecting with them to say, you were interested, but you didn't apply. Can we learn something, even if this is not the right round for them? Can we learn something about putting out an RFP like this in the future?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you.
Councilmember Cummings, that actually is something that we do often is part of our procurement process is to be able to ask questions because it's not a bid, it's a request for proposal. So often we'll go back and say, what do you mean about this section? Or what do you mean about this? So that's absolutely something that we can do within the process.
Good, thanks.
Well, thank you both, Jessica and Amanda. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I even learned more tonight. I thought I was pretty smart after Thursday night's meeting, so now I'm going to be really smart. Item number 2, Regional Park System Equity Grant Program, proposed process and timeline. We have a new presenter tonight. Her name is Jessica Lee. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair and council members. I'm going to give an update on the equity grant program and the staff proposal to postpone the next grant cycle for 1 year. First, I'll just give an update on the previous 2 years' grant cycles. In 2019, which is our pilot year, and then 2021, which was our first year of full funding, we had 26 grants awarded, and currently those are all still open. A couple have not even executed the grant agreements. Most of them, I do want to be clear, most of them are working very hard, and there's a ton of stuff happening this summer. A lot of the programming, I could take this off. A lot of the programming projects have gotten going this summer. They use the winter to kind of plan and hire staff and that kind of thing. So most of them are active, but to date, none of them have submitted any outcomes or accomplishments in their semi-annual reports. So we don't have anything to share yet. And we like to use those outcomes to make a case for, why we should put more funding into this program. In addition to that, our funding for this next cycle has been significantly less than we expected. In 2021, we had about $2 million in funding. You might remember we had $1.4 million in parks interest earnings and $664,000 in council bonds for capital projects. And those interest earnings are really important because we can use that for non-capital projects and programming. And as of December of 2021, we had only about $500,000 in interest earnings available. And that was way less than we expected. We blame it on the pandemic, of course. So that was 2 years' worth of interest earnings. And so we were proposing to wait a year, and we're hoping at the end of 2022, we'll have additional interest earnings. And as well, we'll have 1 more year of council bonds available for those capital projects. And so that would get us closer to that 2 million mark is what we had last time. And if you'll recall, last time, we did have a very competitive grant round. We had, I think it was 3.5 million in asks, and we were able to fund, we had $2 million. So there were several projects that weren't funded, a lot of good projects. And we just want to make sure that we have enough money to have an effective, efficient, competitive program. So with that, our proposed timeline, this would follow the same timeline just 1 year later. So there's a bunch of internal stuff that happens in the spring and winter of 2023, including we will need council approval, of course, to use those interest earnings for the equity grant program. And assuming we have that approval, we will post a notice of funding availability in the fall of 2023 and open the application to web grants. And then we'll have internal review, and again, we'll have a technical review team meet in that winter, and we'll bring the recommendations forward in April of 2024 and get those grant agreements sent out. And this timeline actually works really well with the 2021 grant cycle because those grants will be expiring in June of 2024, assuming they don't have amendments. And so this will allow any programming to kind of continue without a break. And that's all I have for you. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
We had quite a discussion about this item as well at the MPOSC meeting. I say we, like the royal we, and I'm ex officio, so I don't vote, but I occasionally have been known to talk. That was a joke, laugh. But despite being disappointed, folks understand the rationale behind this recommendation and feel like it's a very appropriate recommendation. Yes, Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. So has this decision been made, or is that the question?
Well, staff really supports waiting a year. At this point, it would be challenging to get back on track for that timeline. If we did, I should add, we did meet with implementing agencies, and we discussed this with them as well, with the directors and their outreach folks. And yes, they were a little disappointed, but they understand. They have a lot of grants open already, and this will give them time to focus on those projects too.
Okay, thank you.
COVID has not been good to us in a number of ways. So.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anything further from the group? Okay, Jessica, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And last but definitely not least, national trends in the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Terri Smith. Hello, Terri. Good to see you in person.
Yes, my first in-person meeting. I think I was gone or something at the last one, so thanks for having me. For the record, I'm Terri Smith, and I'm the Director of the Council's Housing and Redevelopment Authority, and I'm with the rest of the presenters tonight. I'm not used to moving my own slides. I usually have all these screens, so I don't have to be fumbling with paper, so I'll ask for grace in advance. But I'm excited to share with you HUD issued a report on the Housing Choice Voucher Program and the impacts COVID has had on the voucher program, and I found it really interesting how parallel some of the national comparisons and trends are to our own program. So I thought I'd just bring you an information item and share some of that information, and then also talk about our need to open the voucher waiting list, which has sort of resulted from some of this. So with that, so our agenda today will just talk about COVID impacts on the Housing Choice Voucher Program. I'll talk about national utilization trends and how those compare with Metro HRA trends. Talk a little bit about funding, what we're looking at for funding this year and how that compares to the national examples. I'll talk a little bit about our special purpose vouchers. I'll tell you what that means, and then show some comparison to national utilization for those, and then the last slide will be, so what are we gonna do about all this? Again, HUD issued a report for 2021, so this is based on 2021 information. They also issued one in 2020. But it really is doing an overall look at what's happening with the voucher program. So these are some of the things that came out of that report. But housing authorities, national leasing for the voucher program is lower than it's ever been in the history of the voucher program. And so HUD is looking from a national perspective to have increased leasing to 98% by the end of this year. So they set that a goal, and they're reaching out to housing authorities with low utilization to try and help housing authorities use the vouchers. Families largely lost income, and that was true for us too here in our region. But families had reduced employment income, reduced income, lost income completely during COVID. And what happens then is as family income goes down, our subsidy costs go up. So tenant rent portion goes down, our subsidy cost goes up. And I know I've talked to you about that on several occasions about our rising subsidy costs, and this is sort of elevated the impact of that. Voucher turnover rates dropped during the period of COVID, and that's also been true for us, and I have a few slides on that, so not as many families or households are going off the program. And remember that with our program, most of the vouchers are in use most of the time. So we're really working with a small number of turnover vouchers to reissue to for a variety of purposes. There was a reduction in new admissions, so people coming off the waiting list and moving into housing for the first time in the voucher program, and a reduction in portability. And I shouldn't have used that term because that's a housing authority term, but it's just the act of people moving around with their voucher to different service areas. So people just weren't moving around during COVID. And then the influx of the CARES Act funding, which is true for us as well, resulted in higher than ever reserve levels at the end of 2020. So these charts get kind of busy, and HUD named them with all their lingo, so maybe if you just sort of ignore the titles at the top, non-MTW just means we're not a moving to work agency. That might.
Greg might be getting called.
It looked like my phone's ringing.
Coming out of the speakers.
Okay, we have background
That's what
music.
Teams sounds like when my phone's ringing.
Right.
But it doesn't seem like it because it rings on my phone too, so sorry about that. If I was at my home desk, I'd just go click. So these charts get pretty busy, but we're a non-moving to work agency, so that's all that means. And these are all vouchers across the country. But as you can see, the national utilization in 2021 was at 86.9%. So like 87% of the vouchers were in use from a national perspective. That's really low. There are several reasons for that, but most housing authorities, I think a big one is that most housing authorities no longer had the opportunity to lease up to their full baseline, so lease all their vouchers because of these increased subsidy costs. So the federal money that folks had wasn't enough to lease all the vouchers. So in 2020, they dropped their utilization, and then in 2021, what was happening is we were all scrambling to get our voucher utilization back up. Although there were some of the highest levels of reserves at the end of 2020, unused vouchers were also due to a variety of factors, including COVID impacts during that time. And housing authorities, I think now should be able to increase their leasing because of the influx of CARES Act and COVID release dollars distributed to housing authorities across the country. But I'm happy to report that we ended the year 2021 at 97.86. And from a HUD report card standard, we didn't do our HUD report cards for the last couple of years. It was waived for COVID, but that would round up to 98%, which is still a sort of high performer status from HUD's standpoint. And so although we like to see that around 99%, even 99.5, we were near 98%. And because of our efforts in the last 6 months, we now, in April, we were at 98.65% utilized. And in May, I just ran the reports this morning, we hit 99%. So we're thrilled with where we're headed, and we won't be one of these agencies that will be working with HUD representatives to get our leasing up, so. But this is how this has happened. So how housing authorities are getting their vouchers leased is through putting more vouchers on the street and issuing vouchers to more families. So in 2021, there were more vouchers on the street than in the past 5 years. And that's a national trend. That was true for Metro HRA too. You may recall we held back from issuing an offer of project-based vouchers in 2021 to help us serve the waiting list. And so we were issuing vouchers, same trend as national, and currently we have about 350 voucher holders in the selection process, either waiting to get their voucher or shopping. I think we have 180 shoppers right now that are out looking for housing with their voucher. I think the other thing that substantially impacted this is the award of emergency housing vouchers. Those were vouchers that were awarded with the American Rescue Act funding because of COVID. Metro HRA got 218 of those vouchers. St. Paul and Minneapolis got a big chunk, and so did Dakota County. So we're all sort of flooding the market with these vouchers to get them under lease quickly. So that's vouchers on the street. Looking at my notes here. In terms of spending and average subsidy costs, this is a pretty busy slide, but essentially what it's telling us is that average subsidy per family subsidy costs continue to rise. And I talked about it a little bit in a previous slide, but people lose their income, their rent portion goes down and our rent portion goes up, limits the number of families that we can serve. I think on top of that, here in our region, we have continued to experience a low vacancy market, so not that many units available. Number two, rents are continuing to rise. We saw a little bit of that stabling off, and we'll be digging into that with you this fall when we talk about payment standards again with our research partners. And then I think the other thing for us is the continued implementation of the small area fair market rents, and people now being able to move to some of those high rent areas, and they completely haven't balanced each other out with the low rent areas, and so that continued to impact our average subsidy costs. On our average subsidy, for example, in January of 2020 was $785, so that's the average amount of rent we're paying on behalf of a family in the program. And in April of 2022, that was way up to $944. So that continues to be very, very steep increases. We spent 97.5% of our funds in 2021, and I think just like other housing authorities across the country, we tried to keep those utilization engines going, and our staff, for example, were processing 45% and a 45% increase in income changes. So every time a family's income goes down, our staff has to spend time recalculating their rent portions, for example, and so that takes a lot of our staffing capacity. I think if there's a good news story to tell on this slide, I'm excited to say that in 2022, we should have enough federal dollars to continue to lease up all our vouchers. And so we're at 99% today. I hope to get to 99.5% by the end of the year, and we'll have enough money to do so. And the reason for that is the money that we didn't spend last year carried over into this year. And so without that, we wouldn't be able to lease up all our vouchers. In addition to that, when HUD issues your subsidy calculation for the year, which we just got 2 weeks ago, they base it on your average cost from last year. And so, as you can see, we continue to have rises in subsidy costs. So what we could do, and I just submitted it today, is submit for additional funding for this year because of those increased costs. So we should get about another $2.3 million. So because of the leftover funding from last year, the additional set-aside funding, this will be the first year in several that we'll be able to lease all our vouchers. So I think that's a good part of the story to share. This screen shows a little bit more about the voucher turnover. I shared this when I talked to you about whether or not to issue PBVs this year and what to do with that, but I think it's worth sharing again just because it was a trend that was covered in this national report. But nationally, housing authorities have been experiencing reduced attrition, so not as many vouchers are turning over for the reasons that I already talked about. And that was true for Metro HRA as well. So in 2018, we had about 65 vouchers a month turnover. In 2019, that dropped to 56. In 2020, that was 53. And in 2021, that dropped to 36. So that's the number of vouchers we had, sort of slots we had to fill each month. So I think a lot of the questions in this national report are we going to return to normal? Are we going to return to pre-COVID, like attrition rates, for example? Or is this trend going to continue? And as I was doing my month-end analysis today from our May payments, it seems like our attrition rates are going to be somewhere in the middle. So far this year, January, February, March, April, and May, we're averaging 45 turnovers per month. So it's not as low as last year. It's not as high as, pre-COVID. And that can change over the year, and that could continue to increase. But that is sort of what's trending for us right now. The next several slides talk about special purpose vouchers, and we call them special purpose vouchers because they serve specific purposes. So they're awarded, in some cases with separate pots of money. They're all federal programs that fall under the Housing Choice Voucher umbrella. So they operate the same, they just operate a little bit differently. I mean, the basic rules are the same, but they serve special populations. So the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Program, that program provides housing and services to veterans experiencing homelessness So we have a partnership with the Minneapolis Department of Veterans Affairs. They provide supportive services and referral for homeless veterans, and then the Metro HRA provides the housing assistance. This number was shared with you when we talked about our PBV presentation and when we decided to offer BASH PBVs instead, but the national figure is 76% leasing. We're at 83% leasing. That program has always been a little bit more difficult to get the veterans to lease up because many of the veterans come with high barriers. And so that's why we decided to issue an RFP for project-based VASH, knowing that then we would have some permanent units and good places for homeless veterans. We have an upcoming information item in a few weeks for the PBV program, so I'll cover that then. This is the non-elderly disabled program, so this provides rent assistance through regular waiting list admissions. So if a family has a person that's living with disabilities, they would just get a NED voucher instead of a regular voucher. Otherwise, they operate the same. But from a national perspective, leasing is way down for the NED vouchers at 87%. We're at 93%, and we will continue to increase that number as all these voucher holders that are shoppers out on the street that will continue to lease up. If they're a family with disabilities, they'll just be labeled with one of these NEDs. So I expect that to increase. Mainstream vouchers, these are fairly new to us. We got our first award back in 2018. They are vouchers that provide rental assistance to people living with disabilities that are between the ages of 18 and 64, so they're non-elderly, and that they are either experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness, recently homeless. And this is where we have the partnership with the Metro Transit Homeless Action Team for the bulk of those vouchers. We have 203 of them, and we are at 93% leasing. The national leasing on these mainstream vouchers is 69%. We got an additional 47 vouchers during COVID, so that was one of the chunks of CARES Act funding we received was for 47 additional vouchers. So we have several shoppers, we call them shoppers, out actively shopping for a voucher, utilizing one of these vouchers. So again, I expect that to get back up to 100% real soon.
Was the additional 47 a permanent addition?
Yes, it was. Thank you, Madam Chair, it was. We have a small family unification program. This is a partnership that with the Public Child Welfare Agency in Anoka County. We have 44 of these. We're at 100% leasing. And nationally, the FUP vouchers are at 79%. We dropped a little bit in May, so we're digging into that. Stephanie and I both today were like, what happened? We dropped like 5 vouchers since last month, so there must be some kind of a fluke or in paperwork or something. But in April, we were at 100%, so we hope to remain there. The other program that falls under this category, we just got our first allocation of foster youth to independence vouchers. It's a brand new program, and it's a partnership with the Public Child Welfare Agencies. We have a partnership with Carver, Anoka, and Hennepin counties, and therefore foster youth that are aging out of foster care, and they're either homeless, at risk of homelessness. And so we then come in and provide a voucher, and the counties provide referral and support services. So we just got our first 11 vouchers, but we can continue to request more as the counties have young people to refer to us. So that's a cool new program. And then we got this influx of emergency housing vouchers that I talked a little bit about. These were awarded in 2021 through the American Rescue Plan. They serve people experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness. There's an additional category for these for people that are fleeing domestic violence. And so we have partnerships for these 218 vouchers with Anoka County, Carver County, Ramsey, and Hennepin. And so we have memorandums of understanding. The referrals for that program have to come through coordinated entry, which creates more complication because coordinated entry is a comprehensive referral service for people experiencing homelessness towards housing and services. And so the counties prioritize people with the highest needs first. So that's how we're getting the referrals for this program. We have received, I think almost 240 referrals for the 218 vouchers. Our leasing is at 38%, and we have lots of shoppers on this program. One of the requirements is that the continuums of care or service provider help with housing search assistance, and so that's a requirement. So all of the EHV shoppers are getting housing search assistance, either through a service provider, a handful through MPHA's outreach team. So that number keeps going up each month, and I'm excited to get that up to 100%. So with all that to say, I think the considerations in terms of what we're going to do, we continue to plug along, we continue to provide services and housing search assistance to as many families as we can, but it's incredibly time intensive to do that. And so we tend to focus on the hardest to house families, families that have high barriers in their background in terms of that. But with our funding, again, our 2022 funding is $75,961,000, and that includes the carryover funding from last year, that $4 million I talked about. And when I did this slide, I hadn't done the full calculation of the set-aside funds, but it says it appears we will be eligible for 2022 set-aside funds. We are. And so today we submitted that application. So that will allow us to lease up to our full baseline, which we're excited about. In terms of voucher success, our success rates, are down. We're struggling just like every other housing authority in the country with voucher lease-up success. We're currently at about 60% for our success rate, so that means about 60% of the people that are issued a voucher actually use it. One of the things we've been doing, and one of the common themes from a national standpoint, was housing authorities all across the country were increasing search times for voucher holders, so the regulations require that we issue vouchers for 30 days. We are typical, and what's in our policy document is 120 days. During COVID, we were issuing for 6 months right out of the gate. Instead of processing exception requests or extension requests, we just issued for 6 months out of the gate. But the national trends and what we find too, the success rates are higher early on in the voucher shopping period. So the longer someone has a voucher, the less likely they become to use it. And what those are generally families that have some of those high barriers in their background, either criminal background, rental history background, and so those are the families that we focus on trying to serve. We're doing intentional outreach to voucher holders, so HUD requires that we update our waiting list periodically to make sure that people on the waiting list are still interested in a voucher. And we also know that success rates are higher when we have a fresh waiting list, that we know that people are interested. We did a waiting list update earlier this year in January, I think January. Yeah, looking at Stephanie, January, and we had more people than ever fall off the waiting list. 65% fell off the waiting list when we did that purge, and that was unusual. Normally we have about 45% fall off, which is pretty typical in past waiting list updates. As we were talking to our partners around the region and around the country, we found that that's happening all over the place. When we talked to our software provider about opening our waiting list, they said they've never seen so many requests for open waiting lists in the history of their company. So it's not unusual to us. When we update our waiting list, we use our online system and say, hey, if you're still interested, respond to this. So many people didn't respond. So then what we did was we sent a mailing to the last known address through paper. Still had a high no response rate. So we called every single one of those families that we had contact information for to see if we could find them, locate them, get their information to keep them on the list. So we ended up dropping 55% instead of 65%. And so that helped us put about 100 people back on the list. We also have a policy that if a family contacts us within 60 days of being removed, like, hey, where am I on the waiting list, that we will put them back on, no questions asked. just because we know it's a confusing process. They're on this list, this list. I'm in the process of moving, and I'm like, who else do I need to tell that I'm moving? Like, you gotta contact everybody under the sun, and so, so we do whatever we can to help families. But that waiting list update and all of the vouchers that we've selected from the waiting list has led to our need to open the waiting list. So hopefully you saw in the RE notes last week or the week before that we're opening the waiting list from June 22nd to June 28th. So that's a week, it's over a weekend. People can apply at any time. There's no advantage to applying early. We're doing more community engagement than we ever had with any other waiting list update. And I really want to give kudos to Stephanie because she's been leading these efforts along with our outreach team, and it's sort of an all hands on deck in the HRA to help this waiting list opening be a success and make sure that everybody knows about it. But the team will be out in the community helping with applications at libraries, community centers. We're working with communications to develop some promotional pieces that we hope to distribute widely tomorrow. We're doing Gov Delivery, we're notifying partners, and we're all over the region trying to get the word out on this. So we will be back to you. We have an information item planned in the future after the waiting list closes to tell you how it went. And so what we will do is, you may recall last time we opened in 2019, we got 17,400 application requests. We were only able to put 2,000 on the waiting list. And so we'll do a random draw again of 2,000, and I'm certain we will have high volume again. Last time we opened in conjunction with St. Paul and Minneapolis. They're not ready to open, so we're opening solo this time, but we'll be back for that. We're continuing to provide housing search assistance as much as we're able to do, focusing on those hard-to-house families. And we do have some funds that we dedicated through our budget for assistance with things like security deposits and application fees. So that is helpful when families are out of resources. Certainly emergency assistance is our first stop if they've already used it or are not eligible. We do have some funds for that purpose, so families shouldn't be losing housing opportunities because they can't pay the deposit. And then under Landlord Strategies, we're continuing to contact landlords, doing outreach and engagement. Our outreach team does, speaks with owner groups continuously. We have somebody who's on our team that, directly contacts landlords, encourages landlords to participate in the program, try to continually dispel the myths, the negative myths floating out there about participation in the landlord, and so we continue to do that. Expedited inspections, that's one thing we hear from landlords all the time is they don't like the inspection process. And it takes too long. If they are gonna lose out on rent because it takes too long to inspect. So now all of our outreach team members are certified in housing inspections. So if they're, for example, working with an emergency housing vouchers, they're out helping show a unit or something, they can inspect right on site. Or if they're in a crunch, we can't get an inspector out there for 2 weeks or whatever the case may be, the outreach can go out in a pinch and get those inspections done more quickly. And then use our risk mitigation funds. I talked about that for security deposits and so on. Because, it's common for a family to lose out on a unit. The landlord's not gonna wait a day for a security deposit or 2 days for us to, find the resources to help the family pay the deposit. So that's been a useful strategy. And I think, and then the waiting list to open, I already got through all this. So I think I talked about all that. Oh, the other thing I should mention is we still have a waiting list preference in our policy document that will require that 95% of the waiting list placements go to households that live, work, or attend school full-time in the 7-county region. And so they don't necessarily have to live in our service area, but they can live anywhere in the 7-county region. And then the remaining 5% will be awarded to any other applicant, regardless of where they live, outstate Minnesota, out of state. And our computer system will do those random draws. I think that was all I had. Madam Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Got a couple here. We'll start with Councilmember Lindstrom and then Councilmember Mousse.
Thank you. Can you remind me, and I'm sure you've told us to me many times the average wait time? And then what is the longest that any one person can be? Or take today, for example. What's the longest period of time that that person has been on the waiting list? And the reason why I ask is I just saw a tweet from a person who's a Chicago alderman right now. She was just notified that she qualifies for a voucher in Chicago. She first applied in the 1980s.
That's a really good question, Madam Chair, if I may, and Councilmember Lindstrom. That's why we only put 2,000 randomly on the list. We do not want a 10-year or even a 5-year waiting list because they just aren't successful when the waiting list age. So 2,000 is really our goal. We'd like that to be for 2 or 3 years. And I guess we're about that with the last waiting list opening. So I would say our wait time is 2 to 3 to 4 years right now. Minneapolis has a long waiting list. I know St. Paul's not ready to open. They put 3,500 on their list last time they opened, so their wait time's a little bit longer, but I think it depends all across the country on how many people they put on the list. Many years ago, we used to have an open waiting list. Every Thursday, we were open for applications. And that was back when there was a high vacancy rate, and landlords needed us, and we'd pump through those applications. But it's been a long time since that has happened. But the longest somebody's waited on our list, before we opened in 2019, I'd have to look. Let me look. I don't want to say the wrong information, but I feel like we had an 8-year wait list at one point.
And the average right now?
Average rate for us is about 2 to 3 years is what?
Yeah, 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, because
Okay.
we have about 400 names left on our list from 2019. So that's about 3 years.
Thank you.
Councilmember Musse?
Thank you, Mr. Terri, thank you so much for your great presentation and for your great work. In this very challenging housing market, this program is only hope for many families. So I just want to hear more about your intentional outreach to voucher folders. And I want to know if we are using local TVs who speak different languages. Are we leaving voicemail that in other language to folks who don't speak English as a first language? That's really the area I think we may need to do some kind of a targeted, specific, culturally unique outreach. So can you just elaborate more in that area?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilmember Musse. We are doing exactly that through our outreach team, reaching out to culturally specific communities. We have translation available in several languages. You want to come up and talk about it, what we're doing? Stephanie's more close to this than I am, and so she knows more about exactly what we're doing, but do you want to share that with council members, Steph?
Sure. Good evening. My name is Stephanie Paulson. I work with Terri in the Metro HRA. I'm the assistant director in the Metro HRA. Nice to see you all in person. So we are working with a variety. So for speaking just about culturally specific, what we really wanted to do is physically go out and figure out what, like maybe a front desk sees. What does a front desk think that the need is? Is the need for us to come on a specific day and advertise, we'll be here from 2 to 4 or 4 to 6 or whatever they think is a high traffic time? Or do they prefer that we walk them through what the application looks like? This is what you'll see. And when we met with our software developer, we tried to minimize the amount of information that we would need for a family to apply. So previously they needed an email to apply. We've removed that barrier and said, we really just need basic information from you. And if you're selected through the lottery process, then we'll reach out to you and we'll figure out a way to get you set up if you don't have an email or these other barriers that prevent you from applying. So we have the languages right now are in Somali and Hmong, that things will be, or Somali and Spanish, I'm sorry, that they'll be written in. But then using multilingual staff to meet community organizations over the next, let's see, 2 to 3 weeks, and figuring out a plan for specific times, dates, or preferences for outreach.
Thank you. That's really great. That would be very helpful. I just want to add, if there's any opportunity to really also partner with the local TVs, because sometimes folks who, moms and folks who are elderly, they typically use local TV stations in the Hmong community, in the Latino community, East African community. So my mother-in-law watches all the time in the TV. So I think using those kind of channels will really spread the word out, and also working with cultural spaces like mosques, churches, coffee shops, ethnic markets will really go, like Mercado in Lake and I think the Bloomington Carmel Mall in Somali side. So those are kind of unique cultural spaces will help. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And please see us as a partners and resource. So if there's anything we can do to help, to spread the word out, we're here, we're one team. We're here to do whatever we can to help.
Thank you.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Musse, staff, I think we have a Somali staff person that's connecting with mosques around the region.
Correct.
So.
All right, thank you.
Somali speaking outreach team member, yes.
Thank you.
And TVs, we usually get a lot of press, so we're working with communications. I'll be doing press releases, and so you'll see Stephanie on the news. She doesn't want to be on the news. This is her baby. She's done all the work. She should be on the news, right? Council members, don't you agree?
I don't like being on the news either, so I feel your pain.
Stand in solidarity.
So our comments mainly they use the mainstream, so it's time for them to push them a little bit to the non-mainstream outlets as well, so we can get both of the of both worlds. Yeah.
Sure. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions. So when HUD says they want to see increased leasing to 98% nationally, and I know we're way up there. First of all, let me stop for a second and thank you, because I know this is huge, it's so complex, and you're able to synthesize it into things that we can understand and really kind of see what you're doing. But thank you to you and your staff, to you, Stephanie, to you, Terri, and everybody else. I mean, it's great. So my question is there, although it probably would never happen to us, but does HUD threaten to take them away if they're not being leased up?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Cummings, what happens is, so everybody got a letter, and because we were right under that 97% point, we got the letter that says, hey, someone from your local HUD office is gonna reach out to help you increase your utilization. And they never did because we got up on our own, but they will come in and they will have to work with the team to have them look at their payment standards. Are your payment standards high enough to ensure people can have success? What tools are you using to do landlord engagement? What assistance are you providing with families? What's your search time? How long are you issuing vouchers for? They'll come in and look through all of those things and help housing authorities examine that to get their leasing up. But if they don't meet the benchmarks, I mean, they could turn into what they call a troubled agency. So there's high performing agencies, there's standard performing, and then there's troubled. If they turn into a troubled agency, someone or HUD hires a consultant to come in and sort of takes over the housing authority to try and get it back up to performing standards. But I think because of COVID, different areas of the country are experiencing different challenges. So I think HUD, there's a fair number of vouchers that are unused. And so I think HUD wants to do whatever they can to get those vouchers under use. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Let's see, with all of the attempts with landlords to increase the ability to rent and use it for people to use these vouchers, are you having success?
Councilmember, Madam Chair and Councilmember Cummings, we do have some success. I mean, I think more than ever before, we have landlords that reach out to us now when they have vacancies because the outreach team Abdiaziz Ibrahim, who just left us, but he spent so much time developing relationships with landlords that we have landlords now that reach out, hey, we have a vacancy in a 2-bedroom unit. That happens more than ever before. But I think in adopting small area fair market rents has helped because that helped increase the rent limits in some parts of the region that, historically have been sort of excluded for voucher holders. But there are, landlords are still being quite choosy. The vacancy rates are low, and so we want to do whatever we can, like get these inspections done as quickly as we can. I don't know, we considered at one point telling landlords we would pay that gap, like if you hold this unit for 2 weeks for a tenant, we'll pay you because we have these mitigation funds. Did we do that for a while?
We have not yet.
Okay.
One thing that our outreach team, Councilmember Cummings has really vocalized to us, and our outreach team is incredible, is they've said, where we are able to make the most direct kind of connections with the community is doing the inspections. And when we're able to go out and do the inspections, it is not uncommon. They've reported back and said, we'll be out inspecting a unit and we'll kind of give our sales pitch and chat with someone one-on-one, and then they'll tell us about another vacant unit, and then we'll go do a pre-inspection there. And so it's physically going out to the units, which is kind of an old school way of doing it, but it's working. It's making a connection with one person who's physically there, and the outreach team has found success in that too.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that extra work, because I think, you know, I mean, I say it a lot, but it is the relationship that will, in everything that we do and in life in general, that when you have that relationship, that is when you can experience much more success. Even though it is labor-intensive and challenging, the outcome is what we're working for, so that makes it worthwhile. So thank you for that, and I think that's all I had. Just, may I? One more. Can you bring us up to speed again or remind me, moving to work, where we are?
Yes, so Madam Chair and Councilmember Cummings, I was going to say one more thing on your last comment. It slipped my mind. Moving to work is sort of off the table right now. We were trying to get moving to work to one of two ways. One was the partnership with Minneapolis, and we had made progress. We submitted a formal request to HUD. We had made progress, had several meetings with them. Because nobody has done it in the country, it was hard to get their legal team to agree to certain things, and it got really complicated. And they finally said, they didn't give us anything in writing, but they're going to issue a broader regional MTW notice. And it'll provide more specifics on what an agency has to do, become a regional MTW. We expected that like last August, haven't seen anything. So they've said, we're not going to do this. We're going to issue this notice and give housing authorities all across the country an opportunity for this, and we haven't seen it yet. But we will look closely at it when we see it. The other option we were looking at is getting moving to work through one of these expansion cohorts. So Congress approved 100 agency expansion under different cohorts targeting different moving to work activities. They were only awarding 3 to large agencies, which we are. And we applied for the rent reform cohort. At the same time, we applied for the mobility demonstration program. And maybe 2 weeks before our application submittal, HUD contacted us and said, oh, by the way, we've decided that we're not going to award any agency the mobility demonstration and the MTW because both come with robust research components and they didn't think we could handle it. We have the best research team. We can handle it. But, so they said, we're going to make you pick. So we submitted our application. I think we probably would have got either one. We chose mobility because the mobility program came with money. Then they just issued another cohort under self-sufficiency activities and helping families gain wealth. And really, really sad it was not for large agencies. And they filled the 3 large agency slots. So unless Congress makes another rule, we're out of that for now. But we'll get it someday, just not today.
Thank you.
Excellent. Great report. Thank you both. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Chambliss.
That's okay.
Didn't see your hand.
It's a lot of really good information and updates, and it's very complex and very complicated, and it's so helpful to hear this information in different ways, the same information in different ways, and how you're adding to it. I was especially intrigued by the landlord strategies and was very anxious for you to get to that part and to see how that was working. They told us about their issues with inspections, and you came up with some strategies, and it looks like that is working, and so that's really good. I'm just really curious, and this is not necessarily a question for you to answer, but I did hear that during the pandemic, a lot of people in the service industry lost jobs. And I'm wondering if a lot of our voucher holders were in the service industry and impacted. I'm just really curious about that. And when those, and if those jobs might come back, and whether or not some of the long-term, there may be long-term impacts from loss of jobs in the service industry that can affect, you know, our housing and people's, you know, obviously the income impacts.
Good question.
Madam Chair and council member, one of the things in this report was the reduced employment income. I think we were seeing it just anecdotally from staff members or HRA team members. The loss of income, many cases it was service industry, in some cases people had to quit their jobs because they had to stay home and homeschool their kids because their kids couldn't go to school. So we saw all kinds of things. So I would say there wasn't one theme, that it was just a real variety of things. And I think another thing in this report is the unemployment income we were seeing. People had much higher levels of unemployment. And I think worth noting is, you know, folks got that extra chunk of funds with their unemployment. We didn't count that as income. So hopefully that helped families do some savings. But do you agree that it was kind of all over the place, or do you think we saw more thematic?
I agree, but I think that it's a really fair assumption to assume that a lot of the service industry employment is decreased. And so I guess I don't have any strong data to support it, but I don't think that's a stretch.
I guess we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully things get better, and as we continue to stay open, that the service industry will get more robust again. And all the other jobs.
Councilmember Mousse?
One quick question. Thank you, Chair. So to the landlord outreach, I think there are small, you know, landlords of color who may own 2 or 3 or 5 units, who don't mind to really work with Section 8 the voucher, or maybe very happy to really accommodate. So I think I will just, you know, recommend maybe prioritizing them and building more relationship with those kind of, you know, low-hanging differences, because they are not culturally stigmatizing folks with Section 8. They're in the community, and, you know, that might be also be part of the, you know, piece that we need to consider.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Mousse, we definitely have more success with smaller landlords. The ones we struggle with are the big, large management companies that set a policy and then, you know, so we've been trying to reach with people at higher levels at agencies. I think then COVID hit, but it's these big management companies that have these broad, overarching, you know, resident selection criteria and policies. And so I think, you know, the people that we need to get at are not the people that are on the site at the property.
One quick note, maybe let me put my activist hat also. Maybe working with advocacy groups in the community who really are housing advocates. Maybe our, you know, international allies who can help us really, you know, make some noise out there on our behalf. Just saying that if it's, you know, if it's, you know, legal, okay. I think there's some